welcome everybody. Glad to see you here. My name is Master Raven Mayne. Um, I'm a Laurel from the Kingdom of Aidenvelt. I've been painting. I've been in the SCA for over 2 decades, but majority of the time in the SCA, I've been painting illuminated manuscripts. So that was majority of the time I've done. Up until about 10 years or so ago, maybe a little longer, I started painting on fabric. Painting dresses, tunics, a large majority of that's what I was painting at a time, whether you know it or not, or is familiar or not. Um, Painting on fabric in the SCA was not always accepted or wanted in some places. So depending on where you lived, it depends on what kind of response you got from painting on clothes. Majority of time, when I paint on fabric, inadvertently, it actually does look like embroidery from a distance, the way I paint on clothes. So historically, if you do any research on painting on fabric, there's a lot of textile or stamped fabrics, but there is very little that connects that to painting on clothes. Majority of that reason is because there's not a lot of extant pieces in the world, only because of the main factor that the paint that they used on a lot of different things was caustic or acidic, or the things that they used to preserve it wasn't good for fabric. So once it got on cloth, it would only last for so long after, unless it was on silk or a different kind of fabric that was in like a monastery or in churches where they kept really good care of it, but nothing on clothes. In my handout in the back of the last appendix of the handout, you'll see that there's some. I couldn't include all of them, but between me and about 3 other wonderful people in the SCA, we found a lot of documentation of people painting on fabric. The ones that I count on most is there's a woodcut and another reference that talks about painting on fabric for theatrical or festival activities. Paris and in Italy, where they would have a festival and they would just be able to paint on clothes, something kind of like we would have at a sports thing today, where they would paint certain things. Or if you couldn't afford it, sometimes you would paint jewels and pearls and whatever kind of things for a festival. And you'd also do the same thing for theatrical, because a lot of times when you're doing a theater, depending on where you are in the theater, there's no way you can afford those kind of things, even costume jewelry for those kind of things. So you'd paint it on, and of course, none of those things would last very long. But like I said, I've been painting quite a bit on clothes, and I've also now been painting a lot of banners. So I paint full achievement banners, and that's the majority of what I do every day. But I love painting, and anything that had to do with painting on something, whether it was wood, metal, fabric, I've kind of delved into it. So let me start my PowerPoint. Hopefully everybody can see that. This is the first screen I have up. It's painting on fabric. Just I have my email if you have any other questions or something I didn't answer during this class, or the question in the future about stuff, because I have a local painters guild, and now I just started a week ago. I started a known world painters guild, so where we just talk about painting, and I'm trying to get a Zoom meeting started, but haven't been successful so far. So these are some of the things that that you will need if you're going to start painting on fabric. I use acrylic paint, the ones that you see over there on the corner. Those are the main ones I use, but I'm actually delving into trying anything that is considered or works on fabric. I try, and I try everything else. I don't really rule anything out. So I try a little bit of everything. For the longest time, I tried just acrylic paints, um, just right out of the jar, right out of the tube, whatever, for the longest time. And I didn't use any paint medium, but over the years, with my frustration of paint eventually cracking and peeling off the fabric, I try and make sure that I always use a paint medium, which is in the bottom part of the screen there. Those are just 3 different kinds. The middle one is usually for painting acrylic on for portraits, but and you'll notice that there's a difference between the textile mediums, and they're usually in the acrylic paint section in the craft stores, but not always. They always put them in weird spots sometimes, along with metallics for some reason. But the middle one you'll notice is different. It's not for the fabrics because it'll say it has a slow, medium, and high slowing time. So that way, when you're painting portraits, you can kind of control. So I don't buy that one. I usually buy the Delta is one I usually get. But any of these paints, look for sales if you're going to paint on fabric. Use any of these. Sometimes you get them for like 50 cents a tube, a bottle. Sometimes they get like $1.50. Sometimes you got to be very careful, depending on or choosing what kind of paint you want. You can also use, or there has been known that you can use latex house paint, but obviously you're not going to get the colors, but it works on fabric too. So you can use any kind of brush. I use the angled brushes only because I can control how much paint I'm putting down on the fabric that I'm painting. But what you're going to need when you start practicing is that some people I've noticed that when they paint on cloth, they're just brushing the top, and you really want to get the paint into the fabric. So you want to have some sort of pressure when you're pushing on the paint onto the fabric, because you want the paint to get inside the weave of the fabric. So not too hard, but something you're going to need to practice to get that in. Wherever you paint, when you're painting on fabric, make sure you use parchment paper, wax paper. Sometimes if you have an old shower curtain, something on the table to protect. Now, only because sometimes the paint goes through the fabric depending on what you use, but it's always good to protect where you're painting. Now, these are the supplies. If you're going to get ready to start painting. You're going to use paper towels. Always keep them close. Keep a roll close to you as much as you can, because the last thing you want to do is get up and try and find a paper towel if you spill or anything else. So you want something, either a paper towel or a cloth or something within hand's reach, in case something does happen, you can clean up fast. You need a water cup to clean your brushes in between each time that you're painting, or if your paint brush gets globbed up with paint, you want to clean off your brush and then put it in the water and then clean it off again, so you're not putting paint in the water. Sometimes weights work perfect. I had some leg weights that you can change the different weights out. They do make fabric weights. Paper weight, anything to hold down the fabric, because sometimes the fabric, when you're painting it or as you're painting it, it'll move, and you want to prevent your fabric from moving as much as possible, because if it does go through, you're going to have a smear on the back of it, and you don't want that. If I can, I'll try and get something to put my paints in and mix the medium and the paint in the jars. Usually it's 2-part paint, 1-part medium, but each medium is a little different, so you have to remember to read the instructions. But like I said, I put them in different containers. rather than the tube that rather than the bottle that I buy them in. It's just easier to mix that way, and they seem to last a lot longer. But finding the right bottle or to mix the paint in is a little bit easy and not easy. So you have to find out, find something that kind of works for you. These are more of the supplies. I personally use Sharpie fine point markers, the ultra fine tip to do my tracing. And after I finish painting, I'll go back over it with the pen. It hasn't bled on me yet, but I always cross my fingers about that. It helps clean up the lines after you've painted it to when you use it after. So I was talking about that because that's the first thing I saw. But supplies again: ironing board, couple of cotton pieces of fabric to press between the iron and the paint. First, the ironing boards. Most, not all, but most fabric paints need to be heat set to make sure that it's well inside the fabric. Not all. So sometimes after you finish painting, you're going to need to go back over it and iron it. Now, the reason I put a piece of cloth fabric on there is you have to be careful because it's acrylic. Some acrylics, if your iron is too hot, will melt the paint. So you have to be really, really careful. Make sure your iron is on low, if you can. And sometimes I'll iron it from the back, making sure not to move it too much because if you do melt the paint, you don't want it to stick to the ironing board. So, or put a piece of fabric, not something that doesn't have a lot of lint on it, or little pieces of fabric or thread that'll come off. So something like a t-shirt consistency to put between the paint and your iron. So if just to be safe, never iron directly on the paint when you heat set it, or when you're just ironing whatever you're painting on. Make sure you have a good sized table. If your table's too small, you might paint a section and then have to wait till the paint dries before you can move it, type thing. But if you get a good enough size table for the piece that you're working for, what I usually do is I'll put my piece down on a piece on a table. I'll weight it, and then I'll make it so that way I can move my chair around the table rather than move my piece. That way I can paint majority of it without actually having to move the item that I'm painting. Again, as I said at the beginning, there's extra fine point Sharpies is what I use, but you can use paint if you can't. Just a very small brush and like black paint you can use to outline whatever you're painting on. We call it black work, doing black work in Scribble, and basically when I use it before to trace my piece, but also after, it kind of cleans up the lines because you can't make the paint have a sharp edge on it when you usually paint things. So going back over it kind of cleans it up. It looks nice. You can use a pencil or chalk to make to trace your design. So something that comes off. If you're not 100% sure if something is going to last, it's going to be on there, it's going to do what you want to do, always test a piece of the fabric before you paint your piece that you're going to paint on.
Raven, we've got a question here about setting. Have you ever used your dryer to heat set?
Yes. For those of you who don't know, Ainbelt is just in Arizona. So here there's very little or no humidity most of the time. So sometimes I can even hang it outside and it'll be just as a dryer because it's so hot outside. But yes, you can put it in your dryer on low, but be very careful. Like I said, if your dryer is too hot, it will it won't melt some of the acrylics, but it will make it tacky, which means that there's a possibility if your dryer is too hot, the paint will stick to other pieces of the fabric or stick to itself. So just be very, very careful if you do use a dryer and make sure that it's on the lowest setting.
Another question, how about a hair dryer?
Hair dryer. Hair
for sort
dryer
of spot
could
setting?
work. I've never done that, but I should. It could work, but I'm not 100% sure. Only because some of the paints that do require ironing do say iron. So I'm assuming there's probably another more. There's more of a specific reason why it needs to be ironed, but I'm not 100% sure. I mean, if you didn't have a dryer or hang it outside or an iron, then yeah, a blow dryer will work. You just have to be careful. Like I said, just to be careful on the heat setting, because not all, you'd have to make sure that it's on low, because some of those, and not, if you're going to use a blow dryer, make sure it's not too close to the fabric. So when I iron it, I usually do it for about 2 to 3 minutes, and I have a timer, and I do it 2-3 minutes per section. So if you're going to do a blow dryer, make sure that you do it at least a good amount of time in an area. Would be my recommendation if you use the blow dryer.
Okay, thank you.
When I paint, I only paint on natural fabrics. Acrylic is going to has enough varieties to go in multiple different directions that you don't want it to go, whether it's melting, whether it's not being the right color, whether it's going bad, because acrylic paints do go bad after a while. They get lumpy and they don't work as well. So to control what I'm doing when I'm painting, I only paint on natural fabrics, which is linen or cotton. That's just me. If you do anything else, especially you got to be careful of the ones that are, some cotton, some polyester. One, it has a stretch, and when you paint on fabric, even with a paint medium, any kind of fabric with a stretch is not going to be helpful. Also, you do have the point of it. Polyester is an acrylic, so you don't want to have anything when you're trying to iron something when you have to heat set. So I personally try to stay away from anything artificial. Or wool. Wool is another really good thing. Wool is a little hard to paint on, but if you get the right wool, it's kind of good. There are some wool that's too felted where it's not going to work very well. But if you get like a nice flat wool, it'll work. Like I said, linen works. Wool works. And silk. Some of until recently, in the past couple of years, I only used certain paints, like Speedball and other kinds of paints that are used specifically for silk to paint on silk. But I'm finding out now that a lot of other people who didn't have that option or didn't find it were actually using acrylics on silk. So I guess if you have enough paint medium or latex or paint or something that has enough give in it and flexibility, you can use it on silk. It's not as vibrant as silk paint, silk fabric paint that you can use, because it has a more opaque, and it's just nicer. But you can use. I've done it, and I have seen people use acrylic paint on silk. All of these, by the way, before you paint on them, make sure that you wash before you paint on it. Make sure you wash, and this is what I do. So this is the advice I have. I don't paint. I wash my fabric in something that has no perfumes and no dyes in it. I don't use fabric softener, because I know fabric softener does it. I'm not sure about everything else, but I don't want to put any more chemicals on there than I have to. So I make sure of that. I have known that some of the fabric softeners actually adheres to the fabric and will be a barrier between the paint and the fabric that you're painting on. So you also want to wash your clothes, the fabric on high, so that way you get all the pre-shrink out of it as much as possible, and you pull those threads that make up the weave of whatever your fabric you're using as tight as possible. What it'll do is when you paint it, it'll help it be more secure to the fabric, and there won't be too much space for it to actually have a chance of flowing through. So, but that's what I do for fabric. Like I said, wash in hot water, no dyes. Fabric, like I said, no, I got ahead of myself. No fabric softener or dryer sheets even. You got to be careful of that. Piece of paper sticking, you can dry it all in the dryer in the hottest setting. Also iron the fabric before you paint on it. It will give you a nice even flat surface to paint on. You don't want any wrinkles or any lines in it because that'll just make painting on it a little bit harder. And it'll make it a flatter surface to paint on. So I got ahead of myself there. Designs. Designing on something, you have to keep a couple things in mind. If you put too much paint on whatever you're painting on, say you're painting a dress or even a banner or whatever, if you put too much paint on it, the paint will pull and weight down the fabric and it will pull on the threads. So you have to be careful how much paint you put on whatever you're putting it on. When it comes to dresses or tunics or something like that, most of the time you want it to make it look like trim. It kind of blends in with everybody else. It doesn't stand out too much, but no one can tell that it's paint usually. What you want to do when you're coming up with the design is there's a balance. You don't want your design too big, like I said, because it'll weigh down the fabric. And two, even with paint medium in it, if it's too big and too much paint, it could end up cracking. You don't want that. The other half is you don't want to make it too small because you won't be able to tell what it is. If it's just a pattern like a trim pattern maybe, or something really small, it may not matter. But if you want somebody to know what it is from even 6 feet away, you'll want to make sure that it's recognizable, whatever you choose. If you are not sure, I recommend that you print it out on a printer, your design, in different sizes, and then pin those onto a dress or your tunic or even on banner, whatever you're painting on, and step back and see how it looks. That way it'll give you a better idea of what size to use and what looks good. So you can kind of do those things prior to actually putting them on a clothes. One of the good things about a dress anyway is if you would like to paint a bottom of a dress, I always recommend that you do a panel, which is a bottom piece, paint that first. And if you make a mistake, you can just cut out another panel. And then once you do it and you like how it turned out, then you can sew it to the dress. And if anything happens to it, you can always remove it and add another panel on later if it gets damaged or if something happens to the paint. And you don't have to do anything, any repairs to the dress or the tunic or whatever. You can just add a new panel to it. Now, how to get it onto your fabric? There's a couple different ways. There's lots of ways. One is a stencil. That is one of my favorite ways to get on your design on clothes. There's lots of stencils out there. If you have a specific generic design, but there's a lot of stencils out there with all kinds of stuff. There's also a lot of stencils that they use for houses, that they use for different parts of the house, for different things, different designs for different things. But a lot of stencils not for many reasons. So you might be able to see some stencils like in the home area, not just in the craft area. And I didn't find it in the craft area paints section last time, or the stencil section last time. I stumbled onto the stained glass section in the craft store, and they had little pieces of stencil type material that they use for when you're designing the lead part of a stained glass. I use that to cut out and make stencils of my own. But I know they do have stencil type material that you can buy and make your own stencils. And stencil making is, depending on what you're going to do, you have to keep in mind how to make a stencil, because you might have to make two parts or different things, because it's not as easy to make things with multiple sections in it, because something has to hold it all together like a web. So, but that takes practice. Light table, is I use that a lot. Depending, some fabrics you can't see light through, so it's a little harder, but a light table really helps getting the design on a piece of fabric. The other thing that I use is an opaque projector, and that helps with large pieces or anything bigger than 2 foot by 2 foot. And you could do big things with it if you want to do like walls for the camp or banners or things like that. You can use an opaque projector. Sometimes we had someone that just put cloth on their garage door and put an opaque projector and made some really big pieces and outlined it and painted it like that. So those are some of the ways. There's also something that they used to use for embroidery in history, but you can also use it for this instance. It's called prick and pounce. Besides freehand, you can freehand your design sometimes, but you have to be really confident on your freehand. But prick and pounce is something, like I said, they've used for a very long time. And that's basically where you take a picture and you lay it onto your fabric. Again, probably weighing it down so it doesn't move. And you take a pin and you poke little holes all throughout all the lines on your line drawing. And then you could take chalk or some sort of colored powder. Depending on, like, if you have a dark colored, you want to use white chalk if you have it, in a darker color, or reverse if if you're painting on, if you're doing it, you want the different colored chalk so it stands out when you pounce it. And then when you're done, you just lift up your drawing and you should have like a little line that you could just connect the dots on. There are kits out there that are pretty pricey if you want to go the professional prick and pounce route, that will give you the tool to do the pricking part, the cloth, the pouncing part will give you different things. Or you can just use regular, grind up some chalk, and a thumbtack will do just as well. But that's the way I would do it. So.
Okay, Master Raven, another question.
Sure.
Can you point us toward any extant samples of stencils from period? The person has only been able to find one from the British Museum. Are there any others?
Not that I know of. I haven't done much research into it, but yeah, there's not a whole lot. You will find a lot of stamps and all kinds of materials, mostly wood, throughout history. So that seems to be a very wealth of information, but there are really not a whole lot of stencils that I know of. But that's one thing that I probably need to do more research on myself. But no, I don't.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure they did. But you just gotta, like all of us, we just have to find that like golden nugget somewhere.
Yeah, we do have a comment here that you see it in illuminated books at times, pricked images for apprentices to copy.
Yeah. Like I said, they use prick and pounce for a lot of different reasons, and it makes sense that they did. Yeah, and the problem is that it's really hard to do because it destroys the image that the original artwork, because you're poking a whole bunch of holes into it, and that obviously that's if you want to keep that drawing, it's going to be kind of counterproductive if you want to do that. But and usually the other thing too is it's hard to use because it has so many, depending on how many holes in it, but usually there's a lot of them. It's hard to use the same drawing a bunch of times. I mean, you can use it for so long, and then eventually it's going to get, from the pouncing, it's probably going to get weaker and weaker as you go. So for illuminations, luckily they had, they were doing it on animal skin most of the time, so they didn't have that problem. But you also have to be careful of how make sure that when you're doing the prick part of it, you're doing it just enough to get through the paper, so you're not damaging maybe your fabric or what's below the fabric or anything else. So but they did, I know they did a lot for embroidery sections. I think there's quite a few extant pieces where you can still see the chalk line, the little dotted chalk line on the back on some of the embroidery pieces that I've seen.
Yeah, we've also had it pointed out that you'll see that sort of thing being done with lace.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because,
Yeah, lace and black work. You see it in a lot of different areas, and it's kind of neat when you do, because it's you don't usually find it. It's usually in a piece that's falling apart, or some section, because usually you don't see just that. But evidence that they've done it is really kind of cool when you do find it.
we're starting to get a nice conversation going on in the chat here.
Okay, I'll try and catch up with a lot of the stuff as soon as I'll answer all the questions and go through the chat after the end. Thank you
Cool.
for telling me about the questions that are in there while I'm going along,
Yeah,
because I can't see it.
that way people can put them in context.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Paint application. These are some of the things that I painted. The right is what I did. For when I mentioned earlier for the table, I put two tables together. I scrunched up, the center of the dress, and I fanned out the dress so that way I can paint I could paint all the way around. I think the bigger the paints I did, the bottom part was 150 inches around. I think it was 210 inches all the way around. So it's a big wide, especially for the big dresses. So and it's that way, like I mentioned before, you don't have to paint and wait for it to dry or move it or whatever else. So you can just leave it as is. That's the best way I found to do it. One of the things I forgot to mention too is that since I painted in illuminated manuscripts, painted scrolls for the essay for years. A lot of the way I paint on fabric and do different things, I do what I'm kind of known for, at least in my kingdom, is I do a lot of shading. Now they did this with a lot of embroidery, but not a whole lot when they did with painting. So when you find it in any kind of painting on fabric, mostly for stamps, you wouldn't see it, but for most everything that I paint, if I can, I'll do a little shading. In the bottom right, you can kind of see where on the left it's just a lower wreath, and then when I got done shading it, it's on the right. The line there is part of a line that I did for a banner that I did, so that's kind of in process. But I'll lay down for specific, not all the time, but when I do feathers, I do it a lot. I'll lay a base coat down, and I'll go back and shade it later. I don't always do a base coat. Sometimes I will actually paint haphazardly, is what I kind of call it. Is I kind of mix my paints and I'll paint as I go. It kind of gives it different looks. So that, like I said, takes a lot of practice, and I love shading, so I do shading. Now, not all paint likes to be shaded. I know that some of the Jacquards, and Jacquard is a paint that you can buy that is acrylic paint that has textile medium infused in it, so you don't have to add anything. The only problem is that it could be the jars for Jacquard, depending on where you go, could be 2 to 5 times as much as a regular tube of just acrylic paint you get at a craft store. But I do like them a lot. I do like using acrylics a lot if I can. And like just for the start, this what I just mentioned was that they don't like being shaded. So when you mix them together, they don't always do what you want to do. It takes a lot of practice. It took me a lot of practice to get them to shade. They didn't like it. They didn't like doing it at first, but I did. I use a lot of Jacquard when it comes to metallics because um, it just has more vibrance and it seems to adhere better to fabric than your regular medium using medium and acrylics. But like I said, it's a little more pricey, but if you can't afford it, and the paint goes a long way, but it's not a big tube. So if you're going to paint a large section or keep painting, uh, or with it, it might just buy the craft store um, acrylic paints. I don't use fabric paint. Um, I don't use, what I mean by that is I don't, if you go into a craft store and there's paint that says fabric paint, I never bought that stuff. So I can only assume that it's similar to what maybe Jacquard is on a cheaper level or something, but I am stuck with using the Jacquard or mixing the paint medium with regular paints on that's what I've been doing for a very long time. These are tips and tricks. You can put a sealer over the top after you're done with certain pieces if you want to. I use ultra matte acrylic sealer. It's for acrylic paints. The reason I do that is because I mistakenly bought regular matte finish, and it was still too glossy. So it turned what I was hoping to look like embroidery into something that looked like a decal. So it ruined what I painted. So I used the ultra matte. So you can do that. And what it does ultimately is it seals it, but it seals the top. But when you paint on fabric and the paint dries, you can't really see it unless you hold it up to the light, but you'll see that it's pulled some of the fibers together, and there's little holes that you can see through. If you use a finishing coat or a sealer on top, it will not only put it over the top of the paint, but it will fill all those little holes. So it'll help the paint adhere better to the fabric. You can do that. You don't have to, but if you really want to make sure it stays a little bit longer on whatever you're painting, you can do that. Heat setting. I got into the habit of heat setting things even if it said it didn't need it. It's just an extra precaution, just to make sure in my mind that I did everything I can to make sure that it that it adhered to the fabric, and I did. I ironed it. I did everything I possibly could to make sure that it stayed. If you're able to wash the spot if you make a mistake as soon as you can, if you can. Sometimes you just can't. If the paint is wet, don't pick up your item because the rest of your painting is still not dry yet, and you spill paint on it. Sometimes you can't pick up the whole thing. If you can, try and just wash that one section if you can. It's really hard to do if you spill. The only time I found really, either if you spill on any kind of color, different kind of fabric, it's either gone or you're gonna have to change your design. But the only thing that I've even come close to being forgivable is painting on black fabric, because the black acrylics really cover up mistakes very well if you paint black over the mistake. Obviously, and if not a big thick section, once you try and remove as much paint as possible. But this is where also it comes in at the beginning where I said to keep paper towels and a towel next to you. Do whatever you can to try and get that paint lifted off as much as possible. Depending on what you're painting on, sometimes you could take what I have is a curved X-Acto blade. So after the paint is dry, I will try to scrape the paint off as much as possible. You have to really be careful. Not only will you cut your fabric, but you may wear a hole in it. So if I can get as much painted off as the big chunks as I can, I will do it. But you have to really be careful. So you paint over the fabric and paint over or yeah, like I said, change your design. So those are the working with mistakes section. If you're painting clothes, it's really going to be interesting. You have to. I recommend that if you are going to paint a tunic or a dress, um, or even if it's a banner and you want to clean it, well, with clothes anyway, you turn it inside out and then wash it by hand. You can put it on a delicate cycle or a hand wash cycle on your clothes washer. Try not to use soap. Just use water if you possibly can, and then hang dry it rather than stick it in the dryer if it's all possible. When you're washing it, make sure it's on cold water. Make sure that you check it. Make sure that it's cold water that's doing it, because you don't want any hot water. You can do it on low heat, but as if you don't have a cold water option. Again, ironing. Don't directly iron onto the paint, if at all possible. Paint is really fickle. Not all acrylic paints are the same. Every company that makes acrylic paint has their own recipe on how they make paint. So some may have a little bit more of a certain chemical in there or a certain dye in there. So you never really know. So just be hesitant and be careful about about ironing your painted sections anyway. Practice. These are final notes. Practice as much as possible on something that is not your main project. So paint a favor, paint a small banner. Just get as much experience as you can with how paint gets onto the fabric, how to keep it onto the fabric, fixing mistakes. Do all of these things on the things that you'd rather not have a mistake on. So just do as much practice as you can. When you're painting on fabric, make sure that wherever your paint is in your paint bottle, make sure it's not within a hand swipe away. This is also a thing that we do in Scribble. The last thing you want to do is when you're painting is just all of a sudden sweep your hand around and the bottle of paint goes everywhere. And you don't want that. The other thing is, every time you lift up your hands or your arms from whatever you're painting, check your hands and your arms. Check your fingertips, check every place. As you'll get used to it after you do a while. The reason I say that is because paint will get everywhere not only where you want it, but where you don't want it. And sometimes you will be painting and you'll pick up your paint jar to move it, and now you have paint on your hands. So you don't really know. I can't tell you how many times I went to move my fabric and realized I had paint somewhere on the bottom of my hand that I had to figure out where it came from. Sometimes my palette gets paint on it, and I grabbed that by accident. So just be very wary when you paint, where your cup is with the water in it, where your paints are. Make sure wherever you're painting, your area that you're painting has nothing you can tip over, knock over, as wide space where when you're painting on an object, whatever it is, make sure it's just your paintbrush and your paint, and maybe the water within where you have to stretch to get the paint or the water. So just be very careful of that. So here's one of the questions. So I'll stop screen sharing. I'll start answering questions if anybody's got whatever questions you have. So
a few that popped up as you were working through there.
Yeah.
What was the name of that finish that you were saying again? Ultra matte?
Ultra matte acrylic sealer. Yeah. It's don't go to Home Depot or Lowe's for that. Make sure that you go to a craft store for that.
Okay, is it MATTE?
Yeah.
Okay. And somebody asked about fixing errors. would sanding blocks help?
I've tried that. Again, it would probably be safer than the curved razor blade, but it's because, yeah, I think that would work. Again, the only thing that you have to be careful of is wearing at the fibers, because the fibers will only take so much, and the more you work at it, the weaker your fabric's going to get, and eventually, down the road, what may happen is that you're going to get a hole in that section that you're trying to fix. So, um, the best part of that is if there's any way to do a correction or anything else other than that is highly more recommended. Like I said, a design change, or something like that might be work better. But yeah, sanding might work, with a very
Someone,
fine sander might be really good.
someone suggested a nail file.
If it's a small, if it was
Yeah,
a small error.
I've seen small and fine because
Yeah,
usually
yeah,
it's medium and fine on either
yeah,
side, like an emery board.
yeah, yeah. I haven't tried it, but yeah, I don't see why that would work too.
Okay. And somebody suggested having baby wipes nearby for cleaning your hands.
Oh, yes, yes. That would probably be really good too. I like I said, I have a piece of I have a towel next to me that I clean off my hands, and I try and dab it around, like I said, and check my hands every time I go back and forth to whatever I'm painting. So, but yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. Rubbing alcohol. I'm for, let me,
Probably wouldn't need that. Oh, the other really good thing about Jacquard is that I really like is it really comes out of your brush and off of your hands with a little bit of soap and water. Um, Unlike most paints, acrylic paints, sometimes it doesn't always 100% coming out of the brush, or you have to really work it to get off your hands. But the Jacquard just comes off like like it's, especially the brushes, like it's never been in paint. So that's another really good thing that I like about the Jacquard.
if anyone wants to unmute and actually ask your
Yeah,
questions
you can go ahead.
vocally, feel free.
Yeah. Let me do this real quick because some people came in late, so I'll put the handout
Yeah.
in the chat again. Yeah, any questions you got? I think what Liquidex. I can't remember. There's the name of it. There's another acrylic paint that I've never used, but I know that there's out there. So I think it's called Liquidex. I think that a lot of people use on different things. I haven't yet. The first time I saw it, someone was painting on a silk banner with it, and I had no. I thought it was like an off brand. I had no idea, but yeah, it's something that a lot of people use too. So
I have a quick question, if I may.
sure.
So at the beginning of this, you were talking about reasons why they did not paint on fabrics. And you were talking about some of the caustic and some of the sort of chemical reactions. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of any research that you've done on that, or things you can point us to and about resources for that?
Yeah. Some of them I put on the handout or on the back of the last part of the handout. It's not that they didn't do it. It's just that because of the paints that they used, the fabric didn't last. It just over time and use, the paint just, or more than anything, it just didn't. It just either ate away at the fabric or just pulled on it. So mostly because a lot of depending on what you used for paint, because a lot of those uh, were either plant-based or mineral-based. And both of those might have stayed on there, but it depends on what they use for the binder too. And like I mentioned before, a lot of the times it wasn't meant to last that long, so they didn't really care too much. And anything that didn't last really, wasn't a high priority in any center that you go. But I do, if you want, you can email me. That's on my handout too, if you want to email me for information. There was me, and I just got in this conversation, which is really funny. There are 3 mistress brigates in 3 different parts of the SCA. All of them paint on fabric. They did not know about each other until I introduced them in a messenger. And they went, that's kind of funny. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's hard for me because I'm going, which Bridget are you talking about? I don't know. But the one in, I believe, Atlantia, I believe, is the one that I call the guru. And she's the one that has been doing it, painting on fabric since the 70s. And she did a large part of the documentation and the research on it because she's been doing it for years. Like I said, it's not easy to find because even the book, I think it's the Cellini book that gets mentioned a lot. Cellini, it was used as reference for years because of the fact that only some people had it and the book was $400. So there was not a whole lot of, argument for a person that had the book. Finally, they started making reprints and I got a copy of it. The paragraph that gets referenced is they made prints to print on fabric, stamps. A couple lines later, they said they made things out of that fabric. That could have been drapes, it could have been clothes, it could have been, it doesn't actually specifically say, and but that's what gets referenced a lot. So there's a lot of livery that I know shows a lot of it, like in Illuminations that have it on there, but I have yet to see clothes that have been painted. But like I said, there's a lot of reference and stuff. And I also mentioned at the beginning of the class that for I don't know if I want to say decades, but it could be decades. It was just not something accepted in the SCA. I know for whatever reason, it was just not. Maybe because there wasn't, like I said, there wasn't any extant pieces, so no one wanted to do it. But we make a lot of jumps, on assuming things without something that's actually extant. And I hope, I haven't looked at my handout in a while, but I think I added in the one in the back. If not, I'll send it to you. It's one of it talks about the woodcut, and there's a woodcut of people dancing in clothes, and it does reference that they were wearing painted fabrics. So,
Have you ever worked with the interference acrylics?
no, I'm not sure what that is.
They're acrylic paints that kind of block the existing color and bring in some illumination into the paint.
Oh, my first reaction to that's probably for like painting on canvas, but no, I've never used it. Is there a brand name for it?
Yes, but it's in my art room, so I don't
Oh,
have
that's okay.
it. Yeah, it's it can shimmer, kind of.
I'm having my resource department look that up right at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
It's my wife. My wife is looking it up.
It's
Oh.
definitely not period, but
Right.
I know certain paints were mixed with certain metals that had some iridescence to it, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really paint. I paint stuff that has pearl in it. I don't usually, if I'm painting pearls, obviously on clothes, I do use a pearl. And when I'm painting on my banners, I use metallics. It's really hard to find metallic. It's weird to say this, but probably not with the year everybody's had. But I was surprised when I couldn't get paint because the paint factory is closed because of COVID. Now, I had never, not something that had occurred to me. And when I needed paint, I didn't realize I had to blame COVID because I couldn't get paint. So, and it's still happening too, because I think last week for some reason there was a shortage on paint, and it was hard to find a lot of stuff. So I have no idea.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, no problem. I will. What I usually like to do is collect a lot of information on different paints and different things that people use, and I will try it. If I can, if I can find, whatever it is. I trust Mistress Brigitte from Atlanta. I can't remember the last name off the top of my head.
Is it
I'm
Brigitte
sorry.
Bishop?
Yeah. Oh, yes, it is. So if she says it works, it works. I've seen her dresses that this paint that she painted a huge. She does a lot of things that I recommend not to do, and she did them, and it succeeded. So, but she painted a big, huge dress, and there was a big. I mean, she must have painted it from top to bottom with a bunch of designs on it, and she painted it. I don't know if it was that particular one. It might have been the one she painted in the 70s, but she said she only has to touch it up every once in a while, and she just used latex house paint. And the story she told me is that she was painting her house, and she realized that the paint was not coming out of her clothes, and she figured, why not paint the clothes out of it and see if it works, and it did. So
I have
Isn't
used
that the way
latex.
fabulousness happens all the time?
yeah.
Do
We
you have a
when
link for the new Facebook group that you're creating? Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll find it.
Either that or
yeah.
give us the name in the chat.
Yeah, you won't. It's kind of hard to find because I use the old English word of paint, but I will get to it right now.
So I might have a
Well-
partial answer for that. Is it period to have glittery paint? And it is. They would grind up mica
Yeah.
and mix it in with the paint, and that is period.
Oh, cool.
It's not well used because the mica does flake off of the parchment, so we don't have a huge amount of extant pieces that have that, but it is period. It was more used in wall painting than anything else because you could into the wall and it would stay.
Right.
Yeah.
So paneling and stuff like that, you'd see it more often than you would on paper, unless the paper was exceptionally well taken care of. Paper, parchment, you know what I mean. However, it is something that's done, and Fintech, whatever, from Germany, uses that same idea into its paints. So it's about as close to period as you're going to find right this minute, unless you make it yourself.
The interference paint can be found at Michael's.
Oh, there you go. And
So,
if you're gonna use it, remember to test it out on something first before you start using it.
yeah.
Make sure you understand what it actually does and what it doesn't do.
And have you
Thank you
tried
for all that
Flex?
information.
Yes, thank you. And I just added a link to the group, Moon World Painters.
Yeah. So we've got that in the chat for anyone.
Yeah, and as a side note, because I think this is, I liked it, is I like the story is that I created a painters guild in our kingdom Painters Guild. Sitting on our throne was Morgan and Elizabeth. The first person that signed the Painters Guild in England was Elizabeth. So I actually have Queen Elizabeth's signature on my guild charter.
Perfect.
But yeah, practice a lot, and use whatever you can to see what works and what doesn't work. I'm a very good proponent on being first person when it comes to things to succeed or fail, rather than, just, well, it always fails. Well, let me see. Let me fail myself and learn what I can.
More questions?
Any questions?
This isn't the question so much as it is a comment. You were talking about whether or not there was evidence of people wearing printed and painted textiles. And I just wanted to make note to you that one of the reasons that we feel that we don't find as many extant garments that were printed and painted was that they were often burned during the plague. And that is also why it gave rise to so much printing and painting of garments during that time, was because they were they would still look fancy, but they weren't as costly as, say, a brocade or otherwise woven. So that is part of the reason why we don't have as many extant samples, is because they helped keep people safe, but they were all destroyed too. But we have plenty of other samples of people wearing printed textiles in Eastern Europe, Eurasia, and the Middle East, that it very much behooves that Europeans were probably doing it as well. So
yeah, I'm looking for that one thing that cements it, because most of the time They usually just go to drapery, or it
Have you
usually
s-
just goes stamped to that.
Have you seen the bishop's mitre from France in the
Just because of the way you mimed it, I think I did see it.
it's white with it, well, it's white, right? But it has
Yes,
beautiful,
we-
very intricate black. I'll send you a link.
Yeah,
I can
definitely.
find it. But that
Yeah, anything-
obviously is an example.
Anything you could share with me, I'm always, well, we're all kind of looking on for trying to, well, the reason I created the known world one is because I want to have a center place for all of those resources to try and get them all in one spot, because they're all little bits and pieces that make up together painting on fabric. Like, for instance, I talked about this. This is a thing of something that I'm mad at myself about. I talked about the picture that's behind me. This, all I remember, and I lost where I got it. That's the problem. I couldn't find it. I got the picture and I forgot where I got it. But this is in the center is someone selling paint, and on the side they think that this was either textiles or painting on fabric, and they couldn't tell exactly why. And then I don't know what this guy's doing, but they're both painting and they're buying paint from the guy in the center. So
I just put a link to that mitre that I was talking about in the chat if you want to go see it.
yeah,
It's often misquoted as being printed, but I have talked to somebody who's seen it in person. Jorge Steinauer, are you familiar with him? He's in the UK and he's also a brilliant painter. Yeah, but he said, no, that's painted.
oh nice. Yeah, it's been a long time with painting on fabric, because I'd get, I would see something, I go, is that painted? And people are like, what? Well, it looks like it's painted to me, and I'm not sure. And they're like, no, that's not, especially in the SCA, because I paint so much fabric that that's kind of what I see all the time. And usually it's applique or something else, but yeah, if you have, hopefully nobody has to go through it now, but for majority of the, what we used to call the double aughts, from 2000, 2010, there was a lot of backlash about about painting on any kind of fabric, which is just really kind of bizarre.
One technique that I have used in the past, because I'm handicapped, I have some problems with my arms and my hands, among other things. But it does qualify, I guess, as painting on fabric. You mix your textile medium with your acrylic paints and use the end of a very skinny brush and just dot paint on closely to each other. And there's exactly from like 2 feet away, it looks like beadwork.
Yeah, they're doing that with just as a non-SCA thing. They are now doing that with tattooing now, where it looks like a weave pattern or embroidery pattern now. They're doing there's a tattoo patterning that they're doing now. And I do understand about the handicap art, because I am also handicapped. So I'm severely handicapped to the point where I'm losing strength in my right hand, my dominant hand. So for the past 2 years, I've been actually training myself to paint with my left hand. So I definitely know about the handicap part.
Oh, bless you. I'm not there yet, but close.
Yeah.
I fell through a wooden balcony and landed on my tailbone and did a
Yikes.
number on 7 vertebrae in both arms and both legs. So
Ouch.
trying to find something that I can do in bed.
Yeah. I pretty much can't do anything, majority of any kind of so I basically am painting every day, mostly on the banners that I paint, but I paint full achievement banners.
Oh, yeah.
I've been doing that for about, how long have I been doing that? I've been doing that for a while. I got introduced to painting on someone at one of the demos that I did was I did someone was saying, we could piece together a full achievement for you. And there's actually a CD that you can get, or DVD that you can get from UK that has a bunch of heraldic elements to it, and it's a lot of information. Trying to find things on there took a while to figure out because they had their own way of labeling things, but I had a bunch. It has all different elements that you would have on a full achievement. It's mostly in England, but they do have different additions to it, like the ones from like Ireland and I think Spain and France that you can buy. And it's just what it is. It's a lot of helms and lion, animals in different poses. And what I do is I use that. Well, people will tell me what they kind of want, and what I'll do is I'll go and I will piece these all together and make like, something that made like with supporters and device and everything. And I'll use like their program. If most of the time I'll use a program, not always, because sometimes the heraldic drawings are kind of interesting. It'd be nice about it as possible. Some things don't look like the animals that you want on there. So like for cats, like a cat that somebody wanted on there looked like a big weasel, and I was like, I'll use a cat. I'll find a nice drawn cat somewhere. And let me share my screen real quick, and I can show you. If you go, if you look up Raven Mayne and as artist, because I have an artist page, there's a bunch of these in there. So, but this is some of the stuff that I do with. Yeah. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, this is just something I did, and I will do like ground and shields and different stuff like that. So, so far I've done almost 70 of these, and for different people. And I've got there's one I haven't that's made it to Sweden. I'm making another one that's going to LOCAC, and then I have a bunch of different ones that are different people all over. Like in Washington and Texas, and I've been doing these for quite a while. So most of the time these things would, if you saw these in historical, majority of them, not all of them, majority of them don't have shading. They're just one solid color. So I kind of use my artistic thing and do a lot of shading on them. But yeah, there's a lot of these.
Oh,
So,
they're neat. Beautiful.
so let me stop sharing. There we go.
You have a vote for the puffin.
Yeah.
2 votes for the puffin.
Yeah, the story that we like to talk about is my friend wanted one, and he couldn't make up his mind whether he wanted to have on one side of his supporter, he wanted to have a dragon, and on the other side he wanted to have a butterfly. When you picture that in your mind, you realize that that's not going to work very well. And I told him, you'll either have to pick dragons or butterflies, because I don't want to do a banner that has Godzilla fighting Mothra. So
Yeah.
we have to find something that could theoretically be close to the same size. So most of the time I have to work with people on what they want for supporters. The only time I went out on a different route is one person wanted pillars, so I did Roman pillars rather than supporters, but most of the time I do whenever I can. And I work from sumptuary, but I don't use it as rules. I use it as a general term. Like I won't put, obviously if you're not a knight or a peer, I won't put that kind of thing on your banner. But some kingdoms only let you have one supporter, are very regimented on what you can have for full achievement banners. Other kingdoms have nothing. So a lot of times we have to start from there and kind of work our way out. For heralds, when I'm specifically talking to heralds, especially book heralds, I'm making art. I'm not making something that's really official. I'm making something that somebody has personalized for them to put on their wall. So that's a whole nother story.
Okay, any more questions We're well past 6 o'clock now, folks.
Again, if you want to email me or go to the Facebook page, and you can do that, no problem. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.